pay respects to the elders, past and present, for their wisdom, their teaching and their cultural knowledge. Just general housekeeping business. Toilets are sort of turn right, keep turning right, eventually you'll get to some toilets. In case of emergency, go almost to the toilets and turn left again, but hopefully there won't be any emergencies. I understand there may be some testing of alarm noises. I also understand that we have requested for those to happen during morning teas and not in the middle of presentations. So, well, knock on wood. Morning tea and coffee is down 2 flights of stairs, so we'll get there in due course. We have a special spot prize for the last day of conference. Anyone who said, the first person who says, Deborah, I would like a bag of muesli, gets half a bag of muesli. I believe biosecurity in New Zealand would not be impressed if I tried to take that home. So. Yeah. Any other housekeeping? Anything else? About where morning tea is? It's downstairs 2 flights, yeah. But yeah, I assume we'll find it once we get there. Yeah. Right, we've got 8 minutes until our first presentation, so keep on chatting.
Specialisations. I think we should really
SharePoint library. Yeah, exactly. It's
all right.
It couldn't be imagined if you were doing something amazing. I know. Maybe we could kidnap him. We can have him for 6 months and we'll have him.
I'm sure in 1 month the girl will see him a lot. The science translates have access to computer science students. Yeah, because they at RMIT they do a capstone project. So the last few months we've had some students doing it.
We have done a little bit of stuff like that for our discovery report. I don't know that because it's all that student information.
Yes, so something that you can
teach that's very short term as a start involved because the project they do is the capstone project and it has to be done by a certain day. Yeah. So they've done it, but we haven't got it into production because now we've got to go through the rigmarole with IPS and the server. Well, I think it'd just be easier to stream it to host it online in the cloud somewhere and just touch something.
Yeah, because they're
Yeah. So you got a different use for the whole bunch of material.
And I think we have to say on that one, we discovered the slightly depends on cases, ones with markets in the city. Yes, so we have these markets, ones and then becomes two screens. A lot of people still customization I mean, at least each just spot across. Yeah, you can't
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me loud and clear? Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Excellent.
Hi everyone. We've now got Nish here for our first presentation. Well, Nish is virtually here. He's going to be doing a talk and a demo of using Cypress. So Nish is a senior systems analyst at Macquarie University. He specialises in systems integrations and software development. He's the deputy chair of the Special Interest Working Group on Interoperability. And he's on its first task force on Primo automated workflow testing using Cypress. So Nish, I will hand it over to you, and we look forward to hearing and seeing what you've got to show us. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey. I'm just trying to full screen this, and excellent. Thanks, Deborah, for the intro. She pretty much covered the first part of my talk. So basically, yep, I'm Naidoo from Macquarie University Library. And I'm going to be talking to you today on the task force of the Special Interest Working Group, which is Primo Workflow Testing with Cypress. Some of you might have known about the Special Interest Working Group on Interoperability. This year we've kind of restructured how everything works, and we decided to focus on task forces. The new structure basically has Mehmet Çelik as the chair, myself as the deputy chair, and then we have task force project leaders which are assigned to specific task forces, and the task forces themselves are composed of members of the community. Anybody who's interested in that specific task force is welcome to join. So task forces, we've decided to basically focus on specific community issues. That way we can kind of get in a bit deeper and address a lot of the problems and pain points that people in the community are having. And we also want to encourage and support a broader community engagement, so get more people involved in not just the task force, but get more people involved in doing things with like Primo and Alma, and hopefully spreading the knowledge of the community and actually getting them hands-on. And the other part of it is we also want to build and support a developer community to help support task force groups, but also do other developer activity type stuff. And the first cab off the ranks has been the Primo workflows. So the project leader for the workflow testing with Cypress is Lee Horton from the University of Nottingham. There's roughly about 18 people in the task force. We've taken the approach of breaking it down into, I kind of say subgroups, but it's just two focus areas for this task force. And one is the actual requirements gathering. So actually documenting common workflows that people around the world are using with Primo. And that's about basically setting up a set of requirements and documenting them and sharing those with the community as well. And hopefully we can get an even wider swath of the community involved in helping us with that. And we've actually seen a lot of that happen already. And the second focus has been actually converting those workflows into actual code for testing automatically. So people can be involved in one or both of those focused areas, and we're happy to see people chip in and help whenever possible. So there's been a lot of drivers for this specific task force. I think it's been brewing for a little while now. And if anybody was at the IGLU 2019 Primo Testing Best Practice Panel, or has heard feedback from them, you would probably see that a lot of the issues listed here were pretty much raised there as well. And this has been a common issue across most institutions. Everyone knows that manual testing of anything takes time, right? And the problem is that there's more and more things to test, and people have less and less time to do this. And so at some point, something's got to give. And we basically have been reduced to testing basically the most critical stuff, and some of the less critical stuff kind of gets left, and sometimes, hopefully rarely, takes us by surprise, and we have to go in and rectify and fix things. It's not the best, but it's something that we've kind of been forced to do over time. And as releases are starting to get more and more frequent, this problem is going to escalate even more. And another thing is, we don't test accessibility very well either. Even when we do tests, a lot of the time we miss out on testing the accessibility component of our user interfaces. So that's something else that's a bit of a painful issue. The other thing is it's a lot of duplication of effort, especially on shared environments. Like if you were all of us on Primo VE, for example, then we can share the testing, right? Because it should theoretically be fairly similar environments. So those are kind of the drivers for looking at this, and it was almost serendipitous that we had the Igloo best practice panel on Primo testing and the task force starting up at the kind of the same Igloo conference effectively. So the task force has only been in effect for about, well, since just before the Igloo conference. So it hasn't been a very long time yet, but we've actually managed to get a few things done. So sorry, let me just see where I am. Okay, so those are the problems and the drivers for this. And so we were looking at a solution to address these issues. And basically, Mehmet suggested that we have a look at Cypress.io for doing automated testing. So this is about automating the tests and removing the manual from the testing. So just that alone should have a significant impact, if we can pull this off, on how much effort we put into testing. So what is Cypress.io? So Cypress.io is a testing automation framework. It's designed to basically test web applications, websites, and that sort of thing. The URL is at the top there, Cypress.io, and there's a YouTube video on how to actually install Cypress and set it up. It's about a 10-minute video, which goes through 2 different mechanisms of installing and setting up Cypress. So as you can see, it's less than a 5-minute job pretty much to set it up. So Cypress is a bit more of a modern take on web testing. It's not Selenium based, which is what the majority of testing frameworks have been. It has a very different way of working under the hood. It uses JavaScript for actually writing the tests, and it uses popular JavaScript frameworks under the hood, such as Macquarie and Chai. So if you've ever used JavaScript, you might have heard of those too. They're fairly popular JavaScript testing frameworks. And Cypress leverages that to actually create and run tests. Well, actually, we're the people create and run the tests. Cypress basically uses them as its engine effectively. There is a tool called the Cypress Scenario Recorder. So instead of actually having to manually code up a test, you can actually just record your actions on a web browser, and the Cypress Scenario Recorder will actually convert those into a Cypress test case for you, with the Mocha and Chai code. It's still in the early days of that scenario recorder, but it's apparently, I haven't actually tried it myself, but it is apparently quite effective. The University of New South Wales has been apparently using this or something similar to do to mock up their tests, and it seems to have been working quite well. Okay, so time for the first demo. Okay, so the first demo, what I'm going to cover is how we start a project and what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to get out of this for the time being and move to my command prompt. So one of the prerequisites for actually running Cypress is that you basically have to have Node.js installed. So that's already been done and that's already been set up. Once you've got Node.js installed, that's pretty much all you need to start installing Cypress. So as you can see, I'm here, I'm in an empty directory, right? So brand new project, we're going to install Cypress right now. And npm is your node package manager, and you just tell it to install Cypress in an empty folder. And that sets up, it will download and it will set up Cypress for you. This takes a couple of minutes to go through, or not. So we're done, actually. So that's quicker than I expected. Okay, to start up Cypress, we do npx Cypress open. Now, before I do that, these are basically this is what you will have in your folder before you run Cypress for the first time. It has a node modules folder, which is all the packages Cypress runs, and a package lock file, which kind of keeps track of what packages you have. npx Cypress open starts up Cypress for you. And that's pretty much all you need to do. And the first time you run Cypress, it sets up some default files for you. So it sets up a whole set of example integrations or example tests that you can use to learn about Cypress and play with and so on. Okay, so I'm just going to log out of this again. We can have a quick look at what the folder looks like now that we've installed Cypress. So as you can see, there's a new Cypress folder in there, and there's a Cypress.json folder in there. The Cypress.json folder is just an empty JavaScript file. There's nothing in there at the moment, but that's basically where you install any Cypress configuration parameters. For out of the box, you don't really need anything just yet, okay? Now let's have a look at what's inside the Cypress folder. I'm going to open up an Explorer window for that. I hope this is a little bit readable at least. Cypress has inside it 4 folders. We've got fixtures, integration, plugins, and support. Integrations is the main component of what we will be looking at, which are actually the tests. So each of the tests are a test name .spec.js. So that's like a test specification. Fixtures are static configuration files. So these are things like if you want to store your Primo URL, usernames, passwords, things like that, that a test will use to run its tasks. Plugins are we're not using plugins at all at the moment, but plugins are for basically extending Cypress functionality. And there's a whole range of predefined plugins that you can just download and install and use if you want. Some of these include different kinds of authentication mechanisms, like leveraging NTLM for authentication, or pre-processing your JavaScript files, pre-processing any fixtures you have, things like that. So there's a whole bunch of plugins you can do various things with, or write your own plugins if you have specific common tasks that you want to perform. The last one is support. The support folder basically contains what's called commands. So in Cypress, you might want to do a particular task, but that task is broken up into several steps, or you might have, for example, which we'll be looking in demo, the third demo, is a login process. So we have a login process where we want to perform a login, but it takes about 6 or 7 steps to do. So instead of having to do those 6 or 7 steps all the time in your tests, you can create what's called a command. And a command basically just packages them up into like a function and lets you reuse that function over and over again, and only have to have it defined once. Okay, so what kind of things can Cypress do? So let's start up Cypress again. So these integration tests under this examples folder basically take you through a whole, like pretty much almost everything that Cypress can do to some extent. I'm going to be looking at, we're just going to look at the actions one to start off with, right? And let's run this and see what it's doing. To run it, just click the button and away you go. So it basically then goes and runs a whole series of tests. And it does them pretty quickly as well. So we'll just let this finish and we'll go have a look at what some of these tests have been doing. Okay, so obviously green means good, red means bad. Where are we? Okay, so this is basically what a test looks like. So that test we just ran is this actions test. We set up at the top level what's called a context, which kind of just groups together all our individual tests. And then we've got what's called a hook, and this hook is before each. It's a function with a special name. Before each is a special name. And this function gets run before every test gets run. IT or it is a test. So as you can see, that's test 1, that's test 2, that's test 3, test 4, test 5. So before each of these tests run, this function gets triggered. So for each test, we revisit the actions page, it reloads, and we start the test on it. So this first test here, basically, first thing we do is we fetch the specific page, and then we go in and we look at the content of the page. So we get the action.email DOM item, and we type in to that DOM item fake@email.com, and then we make sure that fake.email.com actually did get typed into it. You can simulate typing of specific special keys like your left arrow, right arrow, your down arrow, up arrow, delete buttons, backspace buttons, Alt, Control, Shift. You can control how fast you want the typing to happen on that page. You can toggle various inputs and outputs. You can focus on specific elements. You can blur elements, clear elements, submit forms, click buttons, click different areas of particular DOM items. You can, yeah, as you can see, there's a hell of a lot of stuff you can do. It's pretty much everything you can possibly do with your mouse on a browser or your keyboard. You can have that. You can have Cypress simulate that. And that simulation basically will result in the automation of your testing. So you have Cypress do the actions and look for the expected results. And this is kind of like checking for your effective results, right? That's what's called an assertion. So that's Cypress. Let's run another one. Let's pick a random one. Here we go. Let's try that one. So again, you click a test and it runs a whole set of tests for you in a very short amount of time. And if we have a look at the assertions test, what sort of stuff did it do? As you can see, again, before each, we visit the assertions page, and then we describe a group of tests, and we check that the various content of the page is what we expect it to do, is what we expect it to be. If we don't get what we expect it to be, then that's a test failure. And Cypress will inform you that this test has failed. So even just manually going in and testing in this way, so you have your tests done, you just click a button and it runs through all your tests, that alone will save a hell of a lot of time. But one of the other benefits of Cypress is you can actually have this run headless. So you don't actually have to be involved in running it. You can schedule it to run. And you can schedule it to run and it will store and allow you to view all the output and will give you a message if there's a failure. So you can basically just have it running in the background and not worry about it until something breaks, and it will tell you about it. That it would be the ideal scenario to get to, I think, for what we're looking at. But that might take a little while for us to get there. Okay, so let's now have a look at the second demo. Whoops, that was not what I was trying to do. Okay, sorry. So the second demo is we're just going to have a look at a simple test for actually looking at Primo and ensuring that we get the outcomes we expect. And also I'm going to take you through and show you how time traveling works in Cypress. Okay, so for the next part, let's start up Cypress again. I think it's here. Okay, so npx Cypress open. Sorry. Always when you're doing demos. This worked 10 minutes ago. Sorry, folks, it should just be a minute. Okay. So we're going to have a look at this test here, which is a basic Primo search for, basically it's going to do a basic Primo search, and we are going to click a couple of facets on the web page, and then we're going to check that we have 38 results returned for that search. Okay. So as you can see, this top line here is pulling in what's called a fixture, and a fixture is just a set of data that we are going to use. So if you have a look at what the Primo data.json file is, which is the fixture, we've basically got a variable called Primo URL, and that Primo URL is set to Macquarie University's Primo page, which we call multi-search. So yeah, if I say multi-search or I say Primo, those are interchangeable in my head, so please bear with me. So in this test, we're going to be performing a basic search action. And before each test, we want to basically visit this Primo URL. So we start off fresh with a fresh page, and then we go in and we want to perform a test. So we start our test, which starts with it. And this first part here is basically a description of the test. So this performs a basic search, and then you provide a function which actually does the actual testing for us, right? So what is this test doing? Okay, so we've loaded the page. So the first thing we do is we get the search bar. So the search bar in on the multi-search or Primo web page is where you type your stuff in, right? So that in the HTML page in the background, that search bar is effectively where people type queries into, right? And then we're going to say get the search bar, and then in that search bar we are going to type the following text, which is Economics Journal for Economic Theory and Analysis. And then we are going to get the search actions button, which is the little magnifying glass icon, and we are going to click it. Simple. After we've clicked the magnifying glass, we basically get back a set of search results. And now what we're going to do is we are going to click the Macquarie University Library Collection button facet, so that we limit the search to things in the Macquarie University collection. And then we are going to check the results. And we're going to make sure that the results contain 38 results. Okay, so that's our first test. So let's see how that goes, and hopefully it goes well. So we're visiting multi-search, which is Primo. We're typing in Economics Journal for Economic Theory and Analysis. We've clicked the search button. We've got our search results. And we have failed. I'm just going to run that again. And as you can see, this is our assertion that span.results.count to contain 38. So that was a assert, and it was a green light. It means we have successfully passed this test. Right. So the last thing I want to show you is the time traveling. So this is what Cypress calls time traveling. It's because you can see, as you can see, there's a list of everything that has gone on in the browser from the start to the end, right? The great thing about this is you can actually go in at any specific point in time as this process was happening and see what your browser looked like at that specific instance. So as various things were occurring, you are seeing what your browser looked like at exactly that instant. And that's what they call time traveling. So you can go back and forth and have a look at specific instances of activity that was happening on your page during the processing of a specific request. So it's really great if you weren't sure what was going on or why something was the way it was, what did it look like that second you'd missed, or so on. You can go back and have a look at it. So that's a really useful feature of Cypress. Okay, so that's demo number 2. And now we're going to go to demo number 3, which is actually demonstrating an issue we have with Cypress. So this is one of the caveats of using Cypress, is that all your tests have to be within the same superdomain. So you can't change pages in your tests outside of whatever superdomain you're in. So if we, for example, we were in multisearch.mq.edu.au, which is the Primo site for Macquarie University, we can't change to anything outside mq.edu.au. So we can actually do things within multisearch, so within the mq.edu.au, but you can't change out of that domain, because Cypress then loses control and it can't recover that control. So this is a serious problem when it comes to single sign-on, because single sign-on is relies on a lot of transition between different domains and between your identity provider and your service provider. So we were having this issue as well when we were trying to actually do some tests where a person was actually logged in. So that was a bit of a struggle, and we kind of have something that works at the moment. And again, it's going to be a demo, so it seems like it's a little bit 50-50 as to whether it's actually going to work. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when you actually try to do a single sign-on login, right? So basically what you try to simulate is basically clicking on the sign-in button on the multi-search page. So let's try and run that and see what happens. Okay, so we load the page and we basically just click on the sign-in button at the top, and basically you get this error over here. Cypress detected a cross-origin error, happened on page, blocked the frame, and one of the reasons it can't do it is you clicked on a link that routed you outside your application, which is what single sign-on does. So unfortunately, you can't do single sign-on simply with Cypress, which is problematic because a lot of the tests you would want to do would be tests based on a user being logged in. Like if you wanted to check their loan status, a person's fines that were due, or things like that, even the e-shelf, you can't do that unless a person's actually logged in. So one of the things I've been actually working on is how to get around this. So let me just take you through what the issue is and how everything works. So, wow. So basically with single sign-on, the way it works is you have your service provider, which sits in front of the service, in this case, Primo. So the service provider is technically the PDS. And then you've got an identity provider. An identity provider can be a third-party service, which is what we use. We use a third-party service called Okta. There's a range of different third-party services, or it could be something you guys host locally. But basically, between your service provider and your identity provider, for them to work together, there has to be an initial configuration where an exchange of certificates and domain information is exchanged in the setup phase of connecting your IDP to your SP, your identity provider, to your service provider. That's a one-off configuration step. And when a person tries to do a login, the identity provider communicates to the service provider, and the service provider communicates to the identity provider, all by going through the user and the user's browser. So they don't actually talk to each other directly, they talk through the user, which is good because that means we have access to that entire communication stream, so we can kind of simulate that. If they were talking to each other, it would be a lot more difficult to simulate. So what we use is what's called sci.requests, which is different from like sci.visit. Sci.visit is part of your browser, and it kind of triggers a browser event. Sci.requests kind of operates outside your browser, and it kind of doesn't actually do browser type stuff. So you don't get cross-origin errors, you don't get cause issues and things like that. Sci.request operates as a non-browser entity. So I've used that to simulate this whole interaction between the identity provider and the service provider using Cypress sitting in the middle doing the simulation. And basically, the whole process, as I said, works from the user initially triggering a request to the service provider, so asking to use multi-search and signing into multi-search. The service provider would say, hey, this user is trying to access this protected resource. This protected resource is protected by a specific identity provider, so I'm going to hand you off to the identity provider with the URL you are trying to access, the service URL. So the way that happens is that the user gets a redirect from the service provider to point them to the identity provider with the target URL. The identity provider then says, oh, you're a user, let's log you in. So it gets your username and password. It checks which service you're trying to access, ensures that you're allowed to access that service, and then it sends a response. It wants to then send a response to the service provider to say, hey, this user is now authenticated and it's okay to use your service. And the way the identity provider does that is it provides a web page which has a SAML response for the service provider, and it's in a HTML form, which once you get the form, a piece of JavaScript runs, which automatically triggers that form to be submitted back to the service provider, saying that this is the SAML response, which has all your authentication information and everything's good, and then the service provider can use that information to say, okay, yep, you're allowed to use this service, so I'm going to set up a session for you locally and then send you on to the Primo service in this case. So that whole dance of death authentication process is fairly complicated, but you have to kind of deconstruct it all, figure out how it works, and then simulate it using the Cypress requests agent. So let's have a look at what that looks like now. Is everybody still with me? I assume that was a yes, because I just had like a faint murmur in the background. So as I mentioned earlier, the Cypress command is kind of like a function which does a whole series of requests, a whole series of actions, and you can package it all up into a whole lot of stuff for you. And this is a sign-in command for Okta. It's kind of like a function. You pass a username, a password, and an SSO object. And the SSO object is basically all the information you need to actually do the login. So it gives you like the URL for the PDS, the URL for the target you're going to look at, what your institute's called, what the single sign-on provider is called, and so on. And as you can see, there's 6 request components. So request component 1, after you get that, then you check the second part, you do the second request, third request, you extract information, you pass usernames and passwords. So you do all this reasonably painful stuff, and eventually you're logged in, okay? So let's see if we can, again, demo 50-50. So let me just kill some of these things. So this is the test. So basically, the user details are in a fixture. So we have a fixed user, which has a username, a password, and a display name. We grab this fixture, which I've called auth. Then we've also grabbed another fixture, which is the SSO Okta MQ configuration details, which are these URLs and various other settings. And then again, we basically say, alrighty, before each test, we do, sorry, this is a before we do any, it runs once for all our tests, this section here before, and then before each runs once for each test, before each test. So before we start anything, the first thing we do is we do an SSO Okta sign-on, which you pass in the username, password, and the Okta configuration. Then before each test, we go and visit the Primo URL. And in this case, we are just going to have a look at the username that's up in the sign-in box. So if you've successfully signed in, we should have the sign-in name of a person. Rather than the word sign-in, you should have the actual name of the person who signed in. Okay, so if this works, and my fingers are crossed, we will see that happen. Let's make this a bit bigger for people. Nope, not coming bigger. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. So as you can see up here, there's like a whole series of 6 requests which are being processed and simulated. It's trying to log into, it's gone to Primo, passed off to Okta, signed into Okta, passed back to Primo, passed from, sorry, I should say from the PDS to Okta, Okta back to the PDS, from PDS to multi-search. And as you can see, it's done the login. And up here in the corner, we have a user that's logged in. So now we can actually perform tests that are within a user context. So you can check things out like your My Library, My Loans, My Requests, etc., etc. Okay, and that's the last demo for me. So we are down to the questions and discussion stage, if anybody has any questions. Hey, Yuri.
Hey, how you going? I have a question. So you're on the interoperability working group. Can you influence Exlibris so they don't change the DOM?
You know what? That's actually one of the things we discussed. Is that if we are going to be doing this, then there's certain things we have to lobby for, and one of them is to actually not change the DOM, yes, or at least minimize. I mean, we can't expect them to not change the DOM. That's probably an unreasonable expectation, but to minimize and structure things so that we can test well without having to, change tests every release, for example. So if they have a good design, they can probably get away with minimal DOM changes, right? But we have to lobby for that, basically. They have to know what we're trying to achieve, and they have to basically be willing to come to the table to help us achieve that. And that's definitely one of the things that this group is going to be doing.
Hi, Nish, this is Paul from Macquarie.
Hi, Paul.
In the earlier screen, you mentioned Cypress is not a Selenium-based. I'm just curious because simultaneously on the other side of the room, someone will be presenting on Kendo.
Yep.
Now, does Kendo have the similar kind of problem if you have single sign-on and you have to bypass all that problems? Be able to
I am not 100% sure whether you'd be able to simulate all that with via Selenium. I'd assume you would, because there are some advantages and some disadvantages to both things. Cypress, it works slightly different. So Selenium comes with a whole bunch of problems and has some really, really good solutions. It also has some really good tooling around it. It's a really old testing framework. It's been around since I think 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. So it's got a lot of, it's embedded quite strongly in the communities, testing community. And as there's a hell of a lot of really good tooling that has come out to support it. Cypress is like the new kid on the block. So there's, the problem with Selenium being so old is that the web has changed a lot, and the way browsers work, the way the internet works, the kind of things we want to test, the kind of applications that people develop have changed quite significantly. And Selenium still has the way it works. It hasn't adapted much from where it started. And so as things change, things get more complicated in how you want to do things with Selenium. So one of the drivers for Cypress has been that, okay, we need something new, modern, and that works a bit better with modern web application techniques. So so basically what I'm saying is there's pros and cons to both approaches. As I said, with Cypress, you can get around, we've managed to get around that single sign-on issue. With Selenium, I'm not sure whether, because it sits further outside the browser and Cypress is kind of in the browser, Selenium might have some advantage in that respect over Cypress. But as you can see, Cypress kind of covers both. It sits on the fence. It's actually in the browser, but it also has a component that's node-based, which sits outside the browser. And that's where the SIWG-Requests comes in versus the SIWG-Visit. So the SIWG-Visit is making a browser do something. SIWG-Requests is operating outside the browser to do something. So that's how you can get around some of those issues. Does that kind of answer your question, or kind of did I ramble on a bit there?
Yeah, thank you.
My question is the ultimate goal of this to be creating a bunch of tests that can then be shared with the community? So those of us who perhaps have less skill or time to create tests can just steal off all of your hard work.
That is exactly what we are trying to do.
Are you also looking at the possibility of testing it on one platform, for example, the new UI, and then retest it on a VE environment?
Sorry, I didn't get that question. Could you repeat that, Deborah?
Are you developing test cases where, I mean, I guess you can reuse it for a different platform? I'm guessing in the task force you've got people who are on VE.
Sorry, still not. I can't hear the speaker. Sorry.
Are you developing tests for Primo VE as well as the new UI?
Yeah, that would be the intention, definitely. There's a bit of limited exposure to Primo VE at the moment for some of the people in the group. But that's definitely something we've just going to be doing some testing with Primo VE. So we will definitely be covering some of that as well. Yeah, and hopefully, having not seen Primo VE under the UI hood, I'm not sure how different it is from Primo. So given that a lot of things are supposed to work across both platforms, I'm hoping that the differences aren't too extreme, and it's possible that some testing will at least will be compatible with both. But some of that we'll have to find out as we do testing of both platforms.
Any more questions? We've got another one.
Nish, for those that have got lockdown laptops or desktops, you're installing packages. Are there any special permissions you need for that, or is it sort of like
you do need, if you've got Node.js installed, that's pretty much it, because after the Node.js component, everything else is inside a subfolder. So you install Cypress inside your project folder effectively, and that obviously you will have permissions to do. You don't need anything outside that. So as long as you have the capability of installing Node.js, I'm not sure whether you can install Node.js in like user space where you don't need like system permissions or anything like that. It might be possible. But as long as you've got Node.js, Cypress comes pretty easily. As you saw, I mean, basically, once you've got Node.js, you just type npm install Cypress, and it's there. In fact, if people have been using like playing with the Primo developer environment, then you've already probably got Node.js, and you will definitely be able to have Cypress.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Nish. That looked pretty exciting to me. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. And yeah.
So I should just say that there's also there's a Slack channel, and there is an email list that people can get involved in if they want to. So it's on the Igloo Slack channel. There's a group called Workflow Testing.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much. Did you get slides, Naidoo?
No.
I'll just pop this back up there. Okay, I think our next speaker is Amelia on behalf of Sue, who couldn't be with us. So Amelia is going to be talking about, or leading something about who's doing what with APIs. I'll hand over to you.
Do I need to come up or?
Does it pick up from all around?
Probably best to come up actually.
On my
Because
laptop,
the camera's on.
I'm hoping to take some notes as we go. So this isn't, I don't know what Sue had planned for this session. I sort of jumped in last minute to take over when she couldn't come. But I don't think it was designed as a presentation. It was designed actually to be a room discussion about who is doing what with APIs. And the aim being that what you're doing may actually inspire what somebody else could do. And I think an excellent example of that came out of the I'm a librarian getting out of your session yesterday, where one of the cards was talking about what do you do about adding your resource sharing partners. And I think a lot of people answered as well, you add them manually, but actually you can use, I think Nishen actually developed some nice little code to scrape the websites where some of those partners sit and then use an API to load your partners. So that's an example of, had Bond University known about this way of doing it, they might have been able to do it. So it's, I guess the hope of this discussion is to start people sharing information about what they're doing, and as well we'd like to take notes as we go into a Google Drive and maybe share those notes around with people in this room, so that you can continue to contribute and add to it. And when we think it's in a state that we're happy with, so once you've maybe tweaked and changed any of the wording that I put in, and maybe links out to any internal or to any documentation you're willing to share, then we can share it more widely, maybe by the Answering list with the rest of the Answering community, to sort of help prevent people having to relearn the wheel, as it were. So, does anyone want to start? No? Excellent.
So at Monash, we're doing it for the library online membership registration. So for alumni, visitors, Kabbalah users, so we're just using it so that whoever would like to register would just fill in an online form, and then we have the API for user registrations to do that. There's a temporary password that is given to the user as part of an email. But it's not currently integrated with automated payments, because it's a bit fiddly to work with the payment system at Monash. It's not fully automated, but at least 80% of the work is done without users needing to be at the site or needing to fill in a form as part of the process.
That's for who? Alumni?
Alumni, Kabbalah users, visitors who may want to have some sort of library membership.
Really useful. We find just the manual process of having to enter, manually enter Kabbalah users, whereas ideally they'd be able to sign up on an online form, place a request for the item they want, and only come in to physically pick up the item instead of having to come in to register for an account and then go to the shelves to pick up the item. Did you find that easy? Was that easy to set up, or?
It was also, we picked it up from the developer zone, so somebody in the US actually developed it, and so we slightly modified it just to work for our needs, the statistical groups that we have, the patron groups that we have. So,
Was anyone else in the room using an API similar?
Yeah, Sydney, and full disclaimer here, I know nothing, I've just been asked to come here. So please don't ask me difficult questions, I can give you names if you can ask difficult questions of. We're sort of doing something similar because you've got rare books and special collections, which when we went live with ALMA, went live with reading rooms. So for the first time it went to like an automated system of booking and rare books. But then it was, well, what do we do with those clients? Because currently everyone can use rare books, you don't actually have to be a card holder. So we're sort of investigating something similar, but what we have is we've developed an LCDM, which is a library client data management. We're downstream of a lot of other HR and student and everything, and then it goes through a campus cards before it gets to us. So instead of it going straight into ALMA, we put it into our LCDM, run a whole lot of stuff out of it, over it, so people are going to be assigned the right user and that kind of thing. So what we'll do is we'll have a web form registration that goes to our LCDM, and then from there into ALMA.
Yeah, we're doing a similar thing at Adelaide, almost exactly the same membership forms. So at the moment, there's a 32-step manual process that staff do to enter the user in 2 different systems, and then reconcile their payment with the dodgy payment gateway. And so putting that all into one form, so all users use one form. It creates the user in ALMA with the right stack categories. It creates the user in our CRM as well. And also then facilitate payment via hopefully a new payment gateway that I'm trying to get push forward. And then that payment gateway portion, we post the fee to ALMA and pay it, so then we do invoicing for the certain membership.
So is everyone struggling with the payment part
Potentially.
of the memberships? those that are using forms and user APIs to create user accounts, they're still struggling with the payment option.
There is a payment option in Primo for ALMA, but it's not, I think it's for Australia or UK or something. I haven't looked too much into it. It'd be nice if we could integrate properly with the payment gateway.
We've stopped actually fining, well, for most of our fines, we don't do that anymore. There's still a few, and it's largely because payment's such a pain, that it was just easier and cheaper for us to not bother about collecting fines. But we still have to have them for items that have been requested and people not bringing those back.
Yeah. You do pay membership as well, or no membership? For membership, for alumni, that's handled by registry. Okay.
Yeah. So we sort of send them over there and they come back with a bit of paper.
Would you want them to be able to just do it straight at the library or online somehow?
If it was easy, then yes, but yeah, it's the cost benefit of implementing a system.
Yeah.
Because we don't actually have, we're a very small university, we don't have many alumni or external borrowers in any given year.
So is there no, Chris from James Cook, and we don't have any ALMA or Primo yet. So that's why we're here, to have a look and listen. So what I'm hearing in this room is that no payments from ALMA into are easily done. You can't take money off of community borrowers and process the payment easily.
You certainly can, you can add the information in our posts and reconcile that. If you've got someone physically paying you, or you know that they've paid, you hit the pay button and they've paid. But the user can't drive that themselves currently. They can't go to like their My Library account, put in their credit card details and pay.
Right, okay.
We have at Sydney integrated using the API, like it's one stop.
Yeah.
And that seems to be working.
So it was one stop, you said?
Yeah, I think that's payment systems.
Is the limitation actually on the ALMA end, or is it more on the payments system end?
Well, I think it's this obviously integration. You can do anything with any integration, but having it natively support payment gateways by just putting a configuration in our back office would be ideal. Like that would be the.
So there's not much in terms of what's built into ALMA at the moment, or even Primo to facilitate from this kind of thing. Or there's an expectation that any payments will not be taken into account rather than actually. Yeah.
I mean, they are integrated. They've got, I can't think of the acronym, but in the UK they do. There is some configuration.
I mean, I've come from public libraries, and I know for us it was quite a long time coming trying to get native payment integration. So we ended up migrating all the developers natively supported PayPal, and so that was a bit of a pain to get up and running. But once we did, we found the outstanding clients and payments people were much more likely to action it. They could do it themselves and do it out of hours and do it however way. I mean, I know, my background's different to academics, and I'm new to the tertiary sector, but certainly we found from our experience, if you made it nice and straightforward with reasonably common, gateway, it did speed up people's engagement of actually using the payment. But it sounds like it was had quite on just I thought it is just share our experiences from our end. We do a lot more transactional payments from our side, but certainly people in the past have really resisted engaging the library when they've racked up a certain number of fees or fines on missing items or late fees or that kind of stuff. They've made a big difference to us. So.
Sort of talking, I guess, user APIs and payment systems. Is anyone using APIs for anything else?
We are using one at UNSA, Rapid ILL. So we had a really convoluted workflow there. So I managed to shoehorn the request into an Excel spreadsheet. So now it's just an end-to-end process using Excel. So we go in and we click a button. It brings down the requests and then manage it that way. Until I think this sounds like it will eventually be built into our announcement. It was just a response to that to fill the gap in the meantime.
So is that using a Rapid ILL API
It is, yeah.
or an Ulmer API?
Rapid ILL,
Yeah.
So it's not an MR API.
Do you think that ex-leaders are going to incorporate that at some point into the Ulmer resource sharing?
I believe they've acquired Rapid ILL, so
That's right.
I would assume that.
I would assume the new Ulmer resource sharing would be based on it.
Yeah.
Everyone's assuming that.
Rapido seems pretty good. That holistic approach to resource sharing. We're developing partners and we're staying.
Oh, right, okay.
So yeah, it's just a short term.
So you're
Adelaide.
and you're UNS South Australia?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
There's I think it's probably common practice now with acquisitions API, order API, because I think also a lot of people are using it. And we first tested probably 2 or 3 years ago now with Housekeeping before we go on YDP, because YDP wouldn't let us test for free. So Housekeeping we developed working with Housekeeping, so there's order API. There's the Nishen resource sharing partner API. There's a little glitch, a little problem we had, because one partner we had was we have an agreement to not charge anything, so it's a free. So we in the config, the partner we say don't charge interlibrary, so no lending price. But that partner, for example, sometimes they shut for business for say 3 months, no supply or something. And when he switched, because Nishen's code checks, they say whether the web browser any config change, and when that changes, we have a template apply, so that we apply again. So
it's
overriding the manual config change. But he wrote a little fix to say force not to sync. And this another we use is the API work with course synchronization, because our hate to type in all the Magento courses. So when that is updated, and issue another script to come over to our in that certain structure, but that's another one.
So that's the sort of, instead of using the
course
loader and manually loading a file, you're using the API to your university system.
Not 100% because I wasn't probably keen on those before, but
Yeah.
We do the same at Adelaide with course sync. We do real-time course loading, and when it's updated in the course system, it automatically triggers an update to our, and we just went live with that about a month ago. CSV bulk upload every night, which was.
And that's an API you guys have developed?
No, it's the course, our course API is the native hour
Oh, okay.
part.
Yep, and
The integration that Uni Core system does is the custom.
yeah, RMIT, we're currently manually loading our course files, but we are hoping that as the university is changing the system, that a lot of our information is held on, so student information, staff information, course information. We're hoping that when they move to the new system, that it has better support for APIs, and that instead of just recreating what we've got, our ITS will actually do a real time.
Yeah. And if people use PeopleSoft, I think Excellence are working with Oracle to get proper, better integrations between the systems too. So hopefully coming soon.
So at Lincoln we've got a few users of APIs, and I actually did a talk last year, so I can send you the URL of that. But just the main ones, one we've got, we use the config API to pull out all of the open hours and display those on our website. I think a few people have got a few different ways of doing that. Another one is we've got a public dashboard, so we use the analytics APIs, both Alma and Primo analytics, and display certain statistics for people. And the third one is for our external users to allow them to log in. We've got a few databases that external users, any library member is allowed to use, and we want them to have access through Easy Proxy. Usually Easy Proxy checks Active Directory, and our ITS refuses to allow external people to be in Active Directory. So we use the Alma Users API to authenticate the user and then pass that information back to Easy Proxy. So we've got the code for that up on GitHub.
And I developed the API, some legal software for the Rosetta to deposit something like Rosetta. One of them was for, it's 1 year ago, was for the thesis deposit, and you use the your dashboard to deposit the thesis. This middleware check that package, evaluate that, and make it share the package, the broker software Rosetta, and then use the API to deposit them, and also some integration available for the syntactic elements and space, which some of the elements and properties are different between Rosetta and there, and this application uses those APIs to integrate these into different systems.
Do we have other Rosetta users in the room? Yeah. So we're using APIs to update metadata in Rosetta.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And we have a SIP factory as well. Yeah, you know about that. At the National Library, we create and update the APIs heaps. Do that a lot. We also use the Primo API when we're doing searching, if we're getting large donations, if we want to accept them or not, because we find that easier way to work. And the two people commented that the holdings and the items API are not as well developed as the BIPs, and that it would be good if Ex Libris had a sort of a wider view of when they're changing APIs, if they look across the whole of them and make similar things. And the other thing, the great problem, one of our people that uses APIs, he talked about he has to jump out of code space all the time, and you'd like to be able to stay in code space. But he talked about having to use import profiles, APIs, and analytics when he's doing his work, and he finds that really annoying. And the other thing that someone mentioned was really unhelpful was that with the new developer network, the examples in different code language have gone. We've only got, because we use Python a lot, and those examples have all gone now from the developers.
We might be good bit of feedback to Python if there's no the website to post the feedback and just ask them to put those examples back in. Because I find their documentation folks are pretty responsive to requests like that. Yeah.
May I ask with your Primo APIs, you mentioned about large donations. Can you tell us a little bit more how does that API work? I'd say like a donate 1,000 books to you. How does that work?
I'm not the one doing it, I'm
okay.
sorry, but what they'll do is they'll write a script and they'll do a bit of fuzzy matching. So, like if we're getting things in physical or digital, we'll check if we've got the other thing, and then we'll also use that information to be able to help us create big records later.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're trying to recycle metadata or reuse metadata that we've already got, or we'll decide we've got 80% of this collection, we actually don't want it, thanks.
I've used the Primo API ad hoc a couple of times for searching. For instance, we were moving records from Macquarie to digital, and we needed to know in order to give ITS the new link so that they could update the board and learning management system, we needed to know what their Primo link would be. There was no way to extract that in analytics or anything. So we did a search on a set of records in Primo via the API in order to get the permalink information that we needed. So there was just no other way. I don't think even our analytics could give you the information we needed or what the Primo permalink would be. And we also every now and then get requests from researchers wanting to get all the results from a query, which currently you can't do, and the only way to do that is actually to use an API call. Now, it's not something we've widely published to our staff or researchers that we can do it, but ad hoc, if someone's really, really desperate and they come to me and say, hey, I've got to do this, I'll be like, I'll do it for you. We're not sure we want to give out API keys and things like that to researchers, but we've done it for them a couple of times.
I'm just noticing the time that we have actually had morning tea time, so
Yeah.
I feel like we could probably keep talking about this for a lot, but probably everyone wants coffee.
So for the Google Doc, I'll share it around. Please tag what you're doing, what you're working on, and maybe we can have more chats.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for sticking around.
I have no